My thoughts on Donald Trump's State of the Union speech / applause fest on this edition of Hot Take! Holy crap, was that a long speech. Maybe it's just been a while since I sat down and watched a full State of the Union address, but man, that felt like it went on forever. All in all, Trump's speech went about an hour and 20 minutes, and honestly, at times it felt a lot more like just a kind of history lesson of America's greatness rather than a state of what the country is actually going through, which, I mean, is nice. I mean, it's nice to see a president that actually genuinely respects our country's history. And you could tell that Trump really does love this country in his speech. He spent a very large portion of the speech just giving shout outs to police officers and World War II veterans and survivors of the Holocaust. There was just an awful lot of kind of rah America in this speech. The two big themes of this speech that it looked like Trump was trying to hit were unity and optimism, because he was very, very clear about the idea that America's best moments are yet to come, and that if we just come together, that we can make some really great and amazing things happen. Now, will any of this change the minds of Trump's critics? It's hard to say. Probably not. I feel like people are pretty much dug in at this point that no matter what it says or what's happened, people have already made up their mind on Trump. That said, I think he did as well as he could have possibly done to try to counter the narratives against him. I think he made some solid arguments in favor of border security and why the wall is important. And he did play on the heartstrings a whole lot, and it's just kind of a reality of politics to opt for emotional pleas rather than sheer logic. Seemingly all politicians do it, and to be fair, I can only blame him so much because time after time, it's proven to be an effective tactic. But it really struck me just how many applause lines were in this speech. I mean, I counted. Like, let me actually bring it up here. If you can't see that, that's 23 minutes and 48 seconds of applause in that speech. And I started counting late, so I probably missed a couple minutes worth. I counted over 81 applause lines during that speech. And again, I started counting late, so I'm sure there were more than that. That is just a borderline absurd amount of applause for an hour and roughly 20-something minute speech for basically about a quarter of that to be applause is just... And maybe this is more common in State of the Union addresses than I know, but it just really seems excessive. And it's not that I don't think that Trump didn't say a lot of stuff that was good news and was worth applauding, but man, just like, let's condense it a little bit, you know? So Trump talked about a lot in this speech. Obviously kind of the American history sort of thing that I've already mentioned. He spoke a lot about anti-Semitism, interestingly. He spoke about the shooting that took place there last year in Pittsburgh at the Jewish synagogue. He had a couple people there who were survivors of that. I was kind of surprised to see him focus on it that much. It's kind of fits the theme in the sense like it was one of those things that was feel good, but I don't really see necessarily how it's relevant to the country going forward. Now, it does kind of help, I guess, in a sense, to tout his accomplishment of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. But it seems kind of odd going forward. Again, it's a feel-good thing to talk about, but it doesn't seem to be relevant as far as what we're doing going forward. Another thing that Trump made a point to talk about in the speech was the dangers of socialism, and specifically how the United States is not going to become a socialist country ever. And what is striking to me about that is that the Democrats, many of them, sat for that line. While the Republicans were up and applauding, the Democrats sat for that line. In particular, guess who? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I guess it really shouldn't surprise me at this point that so many Democrats are sitting for that line or not happy about that. Bernie Sanders was sitting too. The camera actually panned to him on the Fox News stream. He was looking quite distressed. But still, it really is striking to me that the Democrats are just outright okay with socialism at this point. Trump also made a point to talk about the recent abortion legislation that was passed in New York and Virginia, and he pretty heavily criticized it. He seemed to imply that he might be trying to take some sort of effort at the federal level to do something about late-term abortions. I honestly don't see how that's really going to get anywhere with the Democrats in control of the House. I'd love to see him defund Planned Parenthood, but I mean, he had 2 years with a Republican Congress to do that and never got it done, so I'm not going to hold my breath. He also talked about criminal justice reform, and I have to say one thing I definitely have got to give Trump props on for the speech is his choice of guests that he featured. I mean, World War II veterans, Holocaust survivors, a little girl who had survived cancer, and not only that, but had raised a ton of money for cancer treatments, and also people who have benefited from criminal justice reform, specifically Matthew Charles. I'm so happy that he was invited to the State of the Union address, because as soon as I heard about his story, I was literally praying on a nightly basis, hoping that he would get released from prison. I was so happy when he got released. I actually wrote a story about it for the blog that I write for, the Liberty Cadre, and I was just so thrilled to see him there at the State of the Union and see him grinning from ear to ear when Trump talked about him. And I'm just so happy for him. I think it was a great choice by Trump to bring him there. And also, let me make sure I get her name right, pulling up my notes here. While I'm looking for that, some of the other things that he talked about, he talked a lot about his economic progress, or the economic progress that's happened, record low unemployment. Alice Johnson was her name. She was a nonviolent drug offender who was a prison minister, kind of similar to Matthew Charles in the sense that they both kind of found God in prison, and just probably impacted a whole bunch of people through that. So I was happy to see there too. She was you could tell she was trying not to cry when Trump mentioned her. So I thought that was a really good choice as well. But going back to the economic progress that Trump was talking about, he was talking about record low unemployment, the progress that the tax cuts have made, and there's a couple other things that got brought up in relation to that. He also made a point to talk a lot about the importance of legal immigration, which I thought was a really smart move because Trump constantly gets hammered for being anti-immigrant. And I think he did his best in this speech to make clear that he is anti-illegal immigrant, but he's not anti-immigrant. In fact, he claimed to want to bring more legal immigrants into this country than ever before. We'll see about that. I'm not even necessarily sure how I feel about that. But I think he was definitely doing his best to try to show that he's not anti-immigrant. So Trump touted a lot of accomplishments in this speech. Among a few of them are the Right to Try Act, which allows people to try medications that haven't been approved by the FDA yet if they're in a life-threatening situation. Economic success, as I talked about earlier. The fact that we're sending astronauts back to space. Buzz Aldrin was another person that he had invited there, who he mentioned in reference to that. That was one of the many applause lines in this speech. He also mentioned that companies were bringing back a lot of jobs, and also that America has made great strides in energy production, that we're apparently now a net exporter of energy. Interestingly enough, I didn't see, and it's possible I missed some, but I didn't see any Democrats stand for that, whereas the Republicans got up and applauded. So it was really interesting to kind of look at what the Democrats stood up and applauded and what they didn't. I mean, it's clear that they really did not want to give Trump credit for anything. Let's see. There were several USA chants that broke out during the speech, which was kind of interesting to see. I personally enjoyed it. I almost always like to hear a good USA chant. He also called on the Senate to confirm according to him, over 300 judges that are waiting on being approved. And that was a kind of big theme of the speech, was him just calling on Congress to kind of unify with him on common purposes. And just for the record, I have not had the chance to fact check any of these statistics that Trump made in his speech, so he may very well be incorrect on some of these. But there are many statistics that he did quote that are quite staggering if true, including the 1 of 3 women being raped on the journey to the Mexican border. Again, I don't know where he got that statistic, but if true, that's pretty disturbing. And he made a clear effort to illustrate the dangers of illegal immigration. He talked a lot about human trafficking. He talked about a lot of the crimes that have been committed by illegal aliens. He actually had a woman there who was the daughter of victims. Her parents were victims of crimes of illegal immigrants. I think illegal immigrants actually murdered her parents. A lot of other members of the family were there as well. So again, Trump did just about everything he could to try to pull at the heartstrings and try to make the emotional case and a moral case against illegal immigration. He also made a point to tout the successes of ICE and actually recognized one of their agents for some of the efforts that he'd made arresting, I believe it was human traffickers. He also touted their efforts in stopping drugs from coming over the border. And interestingly enough, he made a point that said he was never going to abolish ICE, and Ocasio-Cortez and a lot of other Democrats were sitting for that line. Surprise, surprise. Oh, he made a point to bring up the fact that more women than ever are serving in Congress. He talked about the U.S. efforts that we're going to be embarking on to promote the economic success of women in foreign nations. I kind of question that as a policy goal, just because why are we spending that money on places outside of the United States? I don't really see what national interest that pursues. I mean, I guess it makes people feel good, but I mean, I don't see why we're not doing that here, just letting people keep that money. He made a point to talk about the importance of ending foreign wars, specifically bringing troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. He also mentioned that the U.S. apparently is pushing for a political solution in Afghanistan. Apparently, we're negotiating with several groups there, including the Taliban. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, the whole reason we went to Afghanistan in the first place was to whoop the Taliban because they were giving cover to Al-Qaeda. Someone's going to have to convince me that it's a good idea to try to negotiate with the Taliban. So that concerns me. I do like the idea of our troops coming home. I actually served a tour in Afghanistan. But I do not like the idea of us negotiating with the Taliban at all. He brought up the anniversary of the USS Cole, and how we've recently killed one of the people who orchestrated that attack. This is kind of part of talking about, in general, foreign policy successes. He made a point to say that we support the new government in Venezuela, and wants to oppose any efforts to reestablish socialism there. He made a point to note that he's going to have another meeting with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, in Vietnam coming up soon. He claims nuclear testing has stopped in North Korea. I've seen reports from other sources that dispute that claim. I haven't really had a chance to look thoroughly into it, but I do question that a little bit. If so, that's great news, but I'm not quite convinced that claim is accurate. He made a point to advocate for school choice, which of course the Democrats are not happy about. I hope he makes that a legislative priority to the extent that that's appropriate at the federal level, because I think that would be a really great benefit to a lot of people. He asked Congress to come up with a plan to eradicate HIV within 10 years. We'll see about that. And I think the one concern I have with the speech is I didn't see any discussions whatsoever of cutting any kind of spending, which is always something I'm going to have a problem with because we're over $20 trillion in debt at this point. It's a major problem. Nobody's talking about it, including Trump, and it concerns me that he did not bring it up even once in his speech. And not only did he not bring it up, but there's several mentions of things that are going to cost us a lot of money, like, for example, a mandate for new paid family leave, which that's another bad idea. I don't think that companies should be forced to provide leave for their employees if they don't think that it fits within their business practice or they don't think it's necessary. If businesses want to, that's great, but the government does not have any businesses does not have any business telling businesses that they've got to offer that. That's not the government's job. Interestingly, when he was touting the economic successes of women, initially many of the Democratic women did not stand, but they ended up finally standing. And I think Trump actually kind of called them out on it. He said, Trump said, you weren't supposed to stand for that, or something to that effect. So that was pretty funny. He made a point to mention the going back to the border, that he was the MS-13 members that have come in as a result of the border. He talked about drugs that have come in. So he was trying to make seemingly every argument possible for a border wall and better border security. He was touting the Farm Bill and VA reforms and VA accountability and the ability to finally fire bad VA employees, which is a good thing, but I really don't have any faith in President Trump or really any other president to fix the VA. It's a government organization. It's always going to have problems, and there's really not much you can do about that. He called the economic boom unprecedented. I think he was a little bit hyperbolic when touting the economic successes. I don't think it's quite fair to say that it's unprecedented, but we have had a lot of really good economic data come out as a result of the deregulation he's done, which he made a point to point that out, that he's done massive deregulations, which I think is a really good thing, and a record low unemployment, and just a lot of other good economic news. Maybe not unprecedented, maybe not record-setting, but definitely very good. He did also say that we have more people working in the United States than ever before. It's possible that's true, since our population is higher than it has ever been, to my knowledge. And combine that with very low unemployment, it's certainly possible that statistic is true. I haven't been able to fact check it, but it doesn't sound counterintuitive in any way. He talked about basically getting NATO to kind of play more of their part that they're supposed to play in security funding. He said that they have spent or committed to spending over $100 million additional than they were originally going to since he took office. He also mentioned a renewed commitment to building a missile defense system, and he also kind of gave an explanation for why he withdrew from the nuclear missile treaty with Russia. Specifically, he was saying, well, basically, we've been following the agreement all this time. Russia has not been following this agreement, so we see no need to uphold it any longer. He did say something about trying to negotiate a new agreement, possibly a multilateral agreement, including China and other nations as well. He also said, though, that in the meantime, we're going to outspend and out-innovate all other nations when it comes to our nuclear stockpile. Now, on one hand, I definitely like the idea of us outpacing other nations in that regard, but anytime a president talks about spending money with our current situation, I'm going to have concerns. And again, just the fact that he was talking about wanting to spend money on that, wanting to spend money on infrastructure, without any talk of cutting spending. And I guess, to be fair, with the Democrats in control of the House, the likelihood of getting any real spending cuts done was low anyway, but still it concerns me that he's not really even going to try. He talked about wanting to protect pre-existing conditions and lower healthcare costs and lower the cost of prescription drugs. He made the point that the U.S. pays notably higher prices for prescription drugs than many of our neighbor countries. I don't know what he actually thinks he's going to do about that. He maybe could push for legislation reducing the number of years that U.S. drug development companies or pharmaceutical companies are protected from generic brands, but that could have some negative effects in the sense that these companies may choose to invest less in developing new drugs because it's not going to be as profitable because they're going to face generic competition sooner. So I'm not really sure how I feel about that. I don't like this idea of continuing to protect people with pre-existing conditions. That's the main thing that's driven up health insurance costs. That was the arguably even a worse provision of Obamacare than the individual mandate. So that really needs to go away. And the fact that Trump has not expressed, or at least not in this speech, any real desire to get rid of that is concerning to me. And of course, he talked a lot about trade. He talked about the supposed disaster known as NAFTA, And once again, he didn't explain exactly why NAFTA was bad or what was wrong with it that caused American workers to unfairly lose jobs. But he did tout the replacement trade deal. Again, he didn't really do anything to explain why it was better. He did announce support for legislation to automatically enact retaliatory tariffs on nations that put tariffs on us. I'm generally a free trade guy, but at the same time, if they're putting the tariffs on us, I can see wanting to maybe apply some leverage to try to get them to reduce their tariffs. So I don't really have a whole lot of heartburn about that. I could support that. He did announce putting tariffs on China in kind of retaliation for some of their intellectual property practices. And it is certainly true that China's robbing us blind when it comes to intellectual property. I don't really care about trade deficits, but intellectual property violations, that is something worth being concerned about. So if the tariffs lead to China cutting back on that, I can be okay with that. But it still always annoys me just how enamored Trump is with tariffs and so-called fair trade. And like, there's times where it's reasonable, like the intellectual property thing, but he just seems to be way too comfortable with tariffs for my taste. That really pretty much sums up the speech. Just he was talking about a lot about his legislative accomplishments, the topics that are important to him, the economic success, trade, ending the wars that we're in, a bunch of new legislative proposals. Immigration was a big theme of the speech, and the main thing that was kind of consistent was he was trying to promote a sense of optimism and the idea that we can do a lot of great things if Congress comes together. So he's clearly trying to fight the tendency of the Democrats to oppose him on everything. I don't know how successful it's going to be. I think he made about as good of a case he could make for it, but I don't really think the Democrats are going to be convinced. They're too entrenched at this point. At the same time, I feel like maybe some people, maybe three of them who were undecided or maybe were kind of starting to lose faith in Trump, I do think this speech will help in that regard. I think he came off about as well as he could come off, considering that people already had pretty much formed opinions of him. And even though there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and I do appreciate having a president who clearly actually cares about this country and just appreciates our history, appreciates our troops, and all of those things. And it was really nice to see that reflected in the speech. So that basically sums up my take on the speech. I thought it was good for what it was. I don't know how true some of the facts he put out were in it. I'm concerned about some of the spending, but all in all, I think it was a reasonably good, albeit very long and very applause-filled, I would argue overly applause-filled speech. So yeah, that's basically my take on the speech. I apologize for the lack of editing in this. I just wanted to try to get it out as quick as I could after the State of the Union. But thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you later. So I gave you guys my take. I'd like to know yours. Let me know down in the comments section if you enjoyed this video. Be sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends.
And subscribe.
Do you want to edit this video? Is that what you want? Do you want to edit this video?
Nah, I'm good.
Okay then! Seriously though, I really would appreciate it if you'd hit that subscribe button. Oh, and hit the little bell to get notifications when I upload new videos, since subscriptions don't mean that much anymore. I'll see you next time.